Hi, I'm Dr. Cindy Blanco, and I am a senior learning scientist at Duolingo. And here, the kind of learning science that I focus on is language science. And as you already know, science is really collaborative. And so my work here involves connecting all of the research that people around the world do on language learning to make sure that the products and language courses that we develop here are really well informed by what we know from the research. And you have been doing a lot of research recently, and I really love the question that you've asked about learning from one speaker or multiple speakers. And I think it's a great question because it's something that learners really care about and think about a lot. And I can remember that when I taught college Spanish classes, that students at the end of the semester would come up to me and to their other instructors. This was something that a lot of us talked about, that students really wanted to keep taking the courses with that same instructor. And they would say at the end, but you're the only person whose Spanish I understand. And I think this gets right to the heart of it, of why I think learning from multiple speakers is really important, is that with just one speaker, if you're learning from just one speaker, you can kind of overlearn information from them. And that information can be sounds, so accents and dialects. It can be particular words. It can be grammar and conversational rules. And so the question you've picked allows us to look at language in all of those different ways, from like the teeny tiny details of sounds to some of these kind of bigger rules about formality or politeness in languages. And so I would always encourage my students to take a class with another instructor that's what would be best for their learning. And this is something that we think about a lot at Duolingo. If you have been studying in a Duolingo course for a while, you might have noticed that we typically had one male and one female speaker. And that was so that we could introduce some variation, right? Variation in gender, while our learners were learning all of those different features, sounds and words and grammar. And even more recently, in the last year, we've been introducing characters, a whole group of different voices and personalities and ages and ethnicities. And this lets us touch on all of those different parts of language learning. So that allows us to tell really fun stories with the characters, where we can introduce some of those conversational rules and politeness and formalities. And of course, this allows us to introduce voices, more voices for our learners to learn words and accents and grammar from. So this is something that's been on my mind a lot even recently. Your study is really interesting because it's not quite what I would have expected to happen. I would have expected an advantage for multiple speakers. And so now is the point in the process of science and analysis where you have to figure out, well, what about this result was really related to things that we did particularly in the experiment, and what are the surprises that just mean we need to revise our hypotheses, change our expectations. And so some of the concepts I would encourage you to think about when you're analyzing these results is what it means for people to learn information. And so in a lot of experiments, the most natural thing is to, teach some of this information and then test participants on how well they learned that. But you could also imagine testing participants a week later or a month later to see how long they hold on to that information. And of course, that's really important in language learning, right? That we want you to retain this information, retain what you've learned so that you can use it for a really long time. So we might see benefits for multiple speakers if you were to retest the participants after some amount of time. And there's other kinds of variation that sometimes end up in experiments that you maybe didn't intend to be there. And I know this has happened in my work as well, that, when you have a condition, part of the experiment with multiple speakers, you've maybe thought a lot about their age or gender or accent, but of course there's going to be other features there as well. So, anytime you have two different voices, one voice might sound friendlier than another, or more reliable, or meaner, or any kind of characteristic that people might have. So you could think about that as being a kind of variation. Um, and there might be other things that you've noticed when you go back and reflect on the choices that you might do differently next time, and maybe these voices would lead to a different kind of learning result if you were looking at grammar or sounds instead of word learning. But it looks to me like you guys have put together something that is really representative of the kind of work that language science and learning scientists like myself do out in the field.